Welcome, everyone, to Latter Daily Digest. We honor creators, and today's show is, in a way, honoring what to do with creators as they leave the earth, we'll say. I don't know. Thanks for coming on the show, Randy.
It's always a pleasure, Gene.
And so I interviewed Randy, I think it was in December, and we talked about his life. He wrote a book, and the name of that book is...
It's Filling Empty, like not feeling empty, but filling empty, like filling an empty heart.
Like if a glass was empty, you fill it up and you have you're back to normal, right? In a way. If
Right.
you had something drain your cup.
Exactly. I wrote the book after my wife passed away. I felt 100% empty. And it took me a few years to even be able to think straight. And so that's when I wrote the book, because I knew that others were having such difficulty overcoming losing a loved one. Hopefully, this book helps those who read it. I've received dozens and dozens of letters from readers who have told me that it was a great help to them. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. And so you mentioned in our interview that you, in order to sort of understand grief a little bit more, you thought you would work in the funeral industry for a little while. Can you tell us what events happened that led up to that?
Absolutely. My genre of writing deals with death and the experiences that people have after they lose a loved one, including spiritual experiences, times where they think that they can see or feel their loved one present. I thought there wouldn't be a better industry in the name of research to get into than the funeral industry. And so I did. I made a few applications, and they're always looking for people. So it didn't take me long I started off as a funeral attendant. And after a couple of months, my superior boss called me in and asked if I'd consider being an assistant funeral director. And
so you just applied for the funeral attendant job.
That was my original application. No, actually, I was applying for a transport position where I go pick up the bodies and bring them back and put them in the proper place, the coolers. And the lady that interviewed me, after she interviewed me, she said, I don't want to waste you on just driving. I would love it if you would become a funeral attendant and work with the people as well. And I took that as a great compliment. And so I accepted that position.
And you said, but let me drive the hearse around my neighborhood after hours.
I actually did that a time or two. Part of my job was driving the hearse and getting to the cemetery. And there were a few times where we had to pick up decedents, but that wasn't my typical job.
But being the attendant allowed you to work with people. And actually, that's what you wanted anyway, was to
exactly
be around those experiencing their loss and stuff like that, so you can investigate and study it a little bit.
That's exactly right. I did a lot of studies about the funeral industry before I ever applied. By the time I got there, I think I'd read about every book I could on it. And then I learned firsthand what it was all about and what it was like. And interestingly enough, I grew up with a phobia. I was scared to death, no pun intended, but I was really, really frightened by funeral homes and dead bodies. That I was scared my whole life, right up until I went to work. I actually went to a therapist to help me overcome that fear before I even got started. So another reason I took the job was to overcome that phobia and that fear. And I think I accomplished that. There were a few scary things, and when I ended up being alone with the decedents and had to put them back in their proper storage area, that was a little creepy, but most of the time I had people around me and there was no frightening experiences.
That's right. We've been teasing people or soliciting questions that we're going to do a show about this subject, about things to consider when a loved one dies. Is there like an overview that you wanted to start with on that that line?
Actually, what I want to say is there's a lot of us that can escape certain situations that we don't have to experience. If we never want to go to a rock concert, we don't have to. The one thing that people cannot escape, unfortunately, is losing loved ones on this earth. It's just part of the security or the circuitous circle of life. And
the only two things certain are death and taxes.
Right. Yeah. And I get plenty of both of those, actually.
What happens when a loved one dies? What are the first things that goes up through people's minds when that happens?
There's a few things to consider. And let me just preface this all with saying that if you can pre-plan for your parents, for yourself, even for your kids, if you can have a plan ready to go, it makes things a lot easier. But the things that you need to consider when someone passes away, you need to determine who's going to be the next of kin. You don't want that decided by anyone but you. And that's the person that will make the major decisions that need to be made. When someone passes away, you need to inform a funeral home. So you need to know what funeral homes are more reputable, and you need to choose based on your findings. If you choose ahead of time, you're ahead of the game. If you don't, then the funeral home that's on a list, and that list, they take turns. They're the ones that'll come pick you up, so you don't have any say in it.
Like you say, if you've planned ahead, and I suppose some people don't want to plan ahead. They don't want to think about their demise. They don't want to think about their loved ones passing. But it just becomes something that if you can get over that by thinking the smart thing to do is be ready. Just like we have disaster preparedness. We don't want an earthquake to cause us to have problems and wreak havoc in our lives, but we want to be prepared in case that does happen.
That's exactly right. Yep. If you're prepared, then everything just kind of falls into place. You need to decide what you want as far as the funeral goes, or if you even want a funeral. And at that funeral, is there going to be a viewing? You may decide that you want to be cremated and let your loved ones know ahead of time. And if you're cremated, then you need to decide, well, are we still going to have a service and have a celebration of life? Another thing to consider is where you want your final disposition. Where do you want to be buried? Or do you want to be buried? If you're cremated, where do you want your ashes to be spread? Or do you want them divided and given to the family? Or do you want them buried in a cemetery next to a loved one? All kinds of things to consider, and we'll get into that a little more in just a little bit. But yeah, you may choose to have your ashes put into jewelry and leave jewelry for each of your loved ones.
And I was thinking, there's a website called Find a Grave. A lot of historic things, like when you Wikipedia, they mark what it says on the grave site as like a historic document, right? And if people are doing cremation, you don't even really need a grave site, right? You could just
No, it's not necessary. And they have niches in cemeteries where you can place an urn so that your loved ones have somewhere to come to ponder and think about you. But it's not necessary. And we're going to get into spreading ashes and how and when and where to do that as well.
And I suppose there's a lot of laws around things like that.
There are laws, and we'll talk about that too.
Yeah. So do you want to just get into all the different options for final disposition?
Well, yeah. I mean, let's talk about when a loved one actually passes away. What are the things to consider? That was, we're basing these questions on all of you, our viewers, what you asked and what you'd like to know about the funeral industry. And the very first question was, what are the things to consider when a loved one dies? So basically, if someone dies in a facility like a hospital or hospice or a nursing home, then it's not necessary to call 911 or any of that, because you have someone there who can pronounce the person deceased. Not just anyone can do that. It's got to be a doctor or a medical professional or paramedics who are communicating with the medical professional. If a loved one dies outside of a hospital or outside of any kind of institution in an accident, or maybe dies at home, that's when you need to call 911. The police and fire department will respond, and the fire department can pronounce the individual deceased. And they can make efforts to revive the person if that's even a possibility. So they basically take over from there. Now, they might take the body to the medical examiner's office, or they might not. A body needs to go through an autopsy if it's an accidental death, if it's
Unsuspected.
unsuspected, when the cause of death isn't known, and anytime there's not a doctor who's willing to sign a death certificate. If it's in the commission of a crime, that also requires an autopsy. Then the last thing is you need to meet with the funeral director and let him know that you have a loved one who's passed and make arrangements with the funeral director. Though you don't have to give him all the answers in the beginning, but that'll allow him to order the death certificates. It'll allow him to arrange the pickup of the deceased and bring them back and place them into a cool storage until the decision's made of what the loved ones or next of kin want to do. Now, there's several options. If you aren't sure, what are the options for the final disposition? And don't mind me glancing my notes here because I want to keep straight all the questions. But the first one is, do you want a funeral with a viewing? Now, I know that a lot of us have been to LDS funerals and they always have a viewing. And, well, I shouldn't say always, but most of the time they have a viewing in the Relief Society room, and then they bring the casket in, and they'll either leave it open during the service, but most of the time it's closed. If you want a viewing, then the body is going to require an autopsy. Or excuse me, if you want a viewing, the body is going to be required to be embalmed. Now, getting embalmed is not a law. People do not have to embalm their loved ones. The only time they have to be embalmed is if you're crossing state lines and the body is being transported from one state to another. Embalming is the process of just preserving the body longer than it would stay preserved without the embalming. I won't get into the details of how that's done, but it does make the body last longer. But you know what? In the end, it's all going to be the same anyway. Embalming doesn't keep the body forever.
What's the wording around preparing a body for an open casket? Because I know sometimes they apply makeup, they do different things with the facial structure.
If there's going to be an open casket viewing, and it's going to be for the public, then yes, the body is embalmed. They use different colors of embalming fluid. If it's a little girl, the colors will probably be more pink with a pink hue. If it's a boy, it'll be a little more blue. They do what they can to make the body look as restful and peaceful as possible. I myself, I'm not a big fan of that because it's confusing, especially to kids. They see a body that looks perfectly fine, and then they wonder, well, are they for sure dead?
Like his grandpa pretending.
When I was on my mission in Spain, they don't do that near as much. And I went to one funeral where there was absolutely no question whether the man was dead or not, because the funeral director had to, they put the body in the person's bed, and then people come to the home to visit, and they come and view the body, and the funeral director is spraying all kinds of Lysol to keep the smell down. Here in the United States, if we embalm the bodies, then they're fit for a viewing. You don't necessarily have to be embalmed if there's going to be a viewing. If it's a private family viewing and the deceased is going to be cremated, then they can simply come and view the body in its natural state. The funeral home will place makeup and what they can to make it look as good as possible. and you can have a private family viewing, and then the body is cremated. The family can actually go view the cremation if they choose to. Most of the time, they leave after the viewing and leave it to the funeral home to cremate the body.
And I know when funeral homes know that the person who passed is a regularly attending church member, there's different churches have different things that they do ahead of time. There might be a priest come in or something, do the last rites, or if that hasn't been done, I guess, I don't know. But for LDS, there is a dressing in the temple robes often, right? And
Yes.
so that happens in this funeral home.
Yeah, when there is an LDS funeral, typically the Relief Society sisters will come if it's a female, or the Elders Quorum Presidency will come if it's a male. They'll dress the body in the garments after the body is embalmed, if it's going to be embalmed, and then they dress them in the LDS temple clothes, unless the family says they don't want that. And we'll talk about the different types of funerals. But yeah, every religion has a different way, and culture, by the way, have different procedures that happen when a body passes away. We worked with a lot of Native Americans, and they come and they take care of the preparation of the body, and they dress the body and they watch over it. And when it's ready to be buried, they take the body away themselves and take the body to wherever the burial is going to be on a reservation, and they bury the body themselves. Yeah, there's all different cultures and different religions and different types of funerals. The different options, we talked about embalming. We talked about burials. Now, you can be buried in a cemetery, or you may choose, if you're in a casket and you're embalmed and all that, the casket is placed into a cement vault in the cemetery. The cover is placed over the cement vault, and then they bury that. The reason is because you don't want the casket eventually decaying away and the ground sinking down. I had a very scary experience in a cemetery one time when I was on a date. My friend and I took dates to the cemetery. We just thought it would be kind of a kick. It was in the Mesa Cemetery, and we were holding hands and walking along, and I took them over to the section of the cemetery where they buried the indigents that had no homes and had no next of kin. So they just basically put them in a wooden box and placed them in the ground. And this is, back in the early 1900s. And I thought what's that?
The classic simple pine cheap box.
Exactly, an SPCB, simple pine cheap box. And I thought I was being really funny. It was nighttime, and I took him to this old section of the cemetery because it was a little scarier. And I said, there is a myth that if you defile one of these graves, or even so much as step on it, the person will reach up and grab your ankle and pull you down. And I'm going to test that myth tonight. And I ran over and I jumped on this grave, just thinking, not the headstone or anything, just the dirt, thinking that I was really funny. Well, there was a hollow cavern under the grave because of that casket that had dissipated, basically. And when I hit that turf, I went straight down, all the way down to the casket. I was wearing brand new tennis shoes. And let me tell you, first of all, my best friend took off running, and so did the girls. And they're leaving me stuck in there, and they're screaming. And I am desperately trying to climb out of this grave. And my brand new pair of tennis shoes are still down in that grave somewhere because they came
up to you like your waist or something.
I was up like between my waist and my chest. And all I could think of was, because I said that about being grabbed and pulled down under, I was being punished and getting pulled down under. But
that's right. I thought I saw that in the Michael Jackson Thriller video. that very scene.
Well, it felt like it. I felt, well, it scared the hell out of me. I'll tell you.
You were
that.
thrilled.
Yeah, not so much. I thanked my friends and,
Yeah, for
or the
ditching
friends
you.
and mates a lot for leaving me behind.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you choose not to be buried in a casket in a graveyard and cemetery, there's also an option for natural burial where you're not embalmed. The body is placed in a biodegradable casket, and there may be you may just be dressed in a flock of some sort, something very comfortable, whatever you choose, or whatever your loved ones choose to have you buried in. I do not want to be buried in a suit, I'll tell you that, because I want to be comfy. So,
Jogging outfit.
a frock of some sort, or a robe, or something really comfy and light. And a lot of times they'll put flowers and flower petals, and then the family will have a service in a dedicated area where you can have these natural burials. And they just cover you with dirt, and the casket degrades quickly, and so does the remains. So, and I love that idea. You also have a choice if you want to. There's two kinds of cremation. One is in the fire, and everything burns. What doesn't burn is ground up and placed in with the ashes as well, because there's parts of the body that doesn't burn complete. That does, I don't want to get
Bones and
to
teeth.
that, but yeah, bones, teeth. A lot of times, there's a lot of chunks in ashes. People don't realize that. So it goes through something called a cremulator, and they grind the ashes so that everything is first of all, they have to put a magnet through it and make sure there's no artificial body parts that were left in there. Then they put it in the cremulator, and then it goes into a plastic bag, and that bag goes into an urn that's chosen by the family. If the family can't afford one, they have just plastic black boxes. There's also biodegradable urns that you can get if you want to bury the remains and have the urn just kind of dissipate away and be in the earth. You can do that. There's also a fairly newer procedure called aquamation, which is a different kind of cremation. They call it water cremation, but it's kind of an oxymoron. But it's where they use a hydrolysis process, almost like a pressure cooker with a great deal of heat, and it dissipates the tissue, the flesh, and all that, and just leaves the skeleton. And the skeleton becomes rather brittle during the process, and so those bones are ground up, and same procedure, placed in a bag, then placed in an urn and given to the family.
And
The difference
is that better for the environment or something? Like the smoke is bad, but the stuff you're putting down the drain is better?
That's a controversy. Some people say, well, that human remains going down the drain, they're not comfortable with that because what medications were they on, blah blah blah. But there's a lot of things that go down a drain that aren't very pleasant. So the big difference, Gene, is that the ashes from a cremation are usually dark or dark green, depending on what the person was wearing. And the ashes from, well, I shouldn't even say ashes, the remains from an aquamation process are bright white, the color of the bones. And so those ashes are very white and delightsome. But some of the other, or one of the other processes that is catching a lot of interest by the public is human composting, where they'll go through a process of letting your body compost naturally and placing it in with soil. And that soil can be given to the loved ones, and the loved ones can plant a tree using that soil. So it's almost like your body is offering a second life to an organism by nourishing and feeding that tree.
That's right.
And
The cycle of life.
the cycle of life, that's right.
So there's no disposal by wolves,
No,
which would be another cycle of life situation, but that's not recommended.
nope. Although I've always thought it would be best if they would just build one of those funeral pyres. Is that what they call them? Like the natives would do, kind of like a stand out in the woods where you place the body on top and just leave it and let nature take its course. That's what I would ultimately love to do, but that wouldn't work. So,
That's right. And Megan Connor wants to be buried at sea, like a Viking burial where the boat's cast off and the fire starts, and then whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, well, let's talk real quick about the cost of everything.
Sure.
The average funeral right now costs about $12,000. That's if you're going to be embalmed and have a viewing and have a service. There's things to consider. You've got to pay for the funeral home, pay for the transportation to and from the funeral home. You've got to pay for a casket, pick that out. You've got to pay for the service itself and a place to have the service, unless it's at a church. Then, depending on the religion, you may not pay anything for that. But then there needs to be a plot that's purchased in a cemetery. You need to pay the cemetery to dig the grave and to lower the casket into the grave. You need a vault for that casket to be lowered into. And you need the cemetery to cover the grave. And then there's the cost of the headstone, which can range from, depending on the laws of the cemetery, can range from $200 up to $10,000, depending on what you want for a headstone. I think I paid $2,500. Nope, I paid more than that. I think I paid $4,500 when my wife passed away for her headstone. And it was just a flat granite headstone, but I made it very decorative. So the cost varies greatly. The typical funeral, $12,000. If you want to be cremated, you can get that as low as $1,000, and that includes an urn. If you want to get a real fancy urn and have a service, you can do that. Typically, it's called a celebration of life rather than a funeral. If there's just the cremains that are left, the urn will go up front with flowers, and you remember the person. So, it varies widely. Typical funeral, $12,000. Cremation, $1,000.
Do you remember what the most expensive funeral you saw was?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I've seen funerals where they spent up to $120,000. And those are just, in my opinion, ludicrous. But, I think that people, to honor their dying loved one, they want to, get the absolute best of everything. And, when you're picking out a casket, the funeral director will show you the most expensive casket first, with a very fancy Sealy mattress in there, with foam that's totally comfortable, the best of the pillows,
Dolby speakers,
everything you can imagine. Yeah, and then as he shows you caskets, they get cheaper and cheaper till you're just down to one of the basic caskets that you can pick up for $700. So yeah, the price varies widely, but cremation is actually the cheapest way to go. Now, the cremation process takes about 2 weeks. The actual cremation only takes between 1 and 4 hours, depending on the size of the decedent. But by the time it becomes that person's turn to go into the crematory, and by the time they have the ashes and get it in the urn and everything, it's generally about a 2-week turnover. The cost, like I said, is much cheaper for that. If you go with the water cremation, or the alkaline hydrolysis is the actual name for it, or the aquamation process, that's between $2,500 and $3,500, and that takes 3 to 16 hours for the body to be fully ready to go into the urn. And then there's the earth soil transformation I was talking about, where you're made into a soil, where you're composted. And the turnover on that is quite a bit longer. It costs about $5,400. Well, not about that. That's the exact price. $5,400 right now. And it takes about a month for your body to compost. And the bones that are left over are treated the same way. They're ground up and go into the soil as well. And that's a very eco-friendly way to go. But those are the options for now. And then I think did you ask about how to scatter the ashes?
Yeah, we mentioned it. We said there might be local laws that would dictate what you can do and what you can't do.
Let me start off by saying this. And this is what I told the grieving families. There are all kinds of laws to spreading ashes, but discretion is all that you need. It's so much easier to just do it and repent than get permission to do it. So I'll tell you the laws, though. If you're going to be buried, you mentioned Megan wants to be buried at sea. That's permissible, but you need to be 3 nautical miles from the shore, and then you can scatter the ashes into the ocean. If you're just going to drop a container, it has to be water soluble and a container that'll dissipate. Yeah, so that's the law on that. Lakes, some people want to have their ashes spread into a lake. Well, you're supposed to get permission from the local authorities to do that, but once again, be discreet. Who in the world will ever know? Same with the national parks. If you want to climb up a mountain and spread ashes where your loved one used to hike, yeah, you're supposed to get permission from the park, but who will ever know? It's just, if you want to avoid the pay, I'm not saying to break the law, but I kind of am. Just be discreet about it. Public parks are the same way. Hiking trails, a permit is required. Cemeteries typically have scattering gardens where you can scatter the ashes in the cemetery garden. And that, not all of them have it, but a lot of them do. And of course, that doesn't require any special permit. You just need to let the cemetery know that you're doing that. So that's about it. And there's just a few tips that I like to remind the families. If it's a windy day, don't try to throw the ashes against the wind. I know that sounds funny, but so many end up with ashes in their nose and mouth, and trying to scatter it, and the wind blows it right back. You need to consider how you're scattering the ashes and what the wind is doing. If it's downwind, that's better. But the ashes are not completely fine dust either. There's little nuggets in there. And so some of them will drop quickly and some of them will fly in the breeze. You just need to use a little common sense on that. The ashes, also, like I said, can be put in jewelry and given to loved ones, or they can be split up, and each family gets a small urn of grandma's cremains, or whoever passes away. And the urns can be customized with pictures, and then there are also cemeteries. Most all of them have niches that you can place the urns in, and they're sealed up just like a grave would be. Some of them are glass so that you can see the urn. Some of them are bricked in so that you just see the small headstone that memorializes them.
Is that about it for the ashes?
Yeah, I think so. Just one other interesting point, and one of our viewers actually pointed this out to me. You can have your ashes made into diamonds if you want. There's actually a few companies, and I'll name them off, but they just need a half a cup or a cup of ashes or a few ounces of hair, and they can make the diamonds with that. The name of it, and that costs, by the way, $1,500 to $20,000, depending on the size of the diamond that you want. But the companies that advertise this service and that are reputable are Eterneva, Heart in Diamond, Algordanza, or Life Gem. And they will actually take your ashes and make diamonds out of them.
Weird.
So that's kind of fun.
Real diamonds or cubic zirconia?
Well, they're laboratory produced.
Oh.
Yeah, but they produce them as nature would. You know,
so there's one other thing came to my mind about the disposition of a loved one. My wife's grandparents both listed donating their bodies to science.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's an option. Let's talk about that for a minute. There's two kinds of donations. There's the whole body donation, where your complete body is donated. And then there's the organ and tissue donation, where they may come to the funeral home and just take the eyes. If it's an internal organ, then that's done at the hospital, or your brain, just certain parts, and then the body can be cremated afterwards. If it's a whole body donation, you'll probably go to one of the institutions, if you don't specify, one of the universities or medical schools like UCLA or Johns Hopkins University. And there's willed body programs where you just will your body to whatever. And have you ever seen body tours where they have all of the skin and sinew off the body, but the arteries, the muscles, the tendons, everything stays, the bones.
Put some sort of resin.
Yeah, right. It's it's actually like a museum, and you go in and you can see that, and that's in the name of education, and your body can be donated to that. And a lot of people feel like, well, I'll still stay whole, and I'll be out in the world. So, they have a real waiting line for people to have that done to their bodies. It's an incredibly intricate process, and it takes a long time, but it's kind of a fun idea if you choose to donate your body to that. The institution that's receiving the body takes care of the transportation. They use the body for a certain amount of time. And if it's not a long amount, it'll go to universities, and that body, that cadaver, will be used for surgical training, for schooling. And then when they're done with it, typically they will at their expense, they'll have the remains cremated, and you'll get the ashes back. If it's a long-term donation, and it's, a very long-term period that the institution is using the body, and then typically, they'll cremate it and with all the other bodies, and the ashes will be disposed of. A couple of places, Science Care is a place that will accept body donations. One is called MedCure, a very reputable program. And not everyone will be accepted, by the way. There are, during COVID, if anyone died of COVID, their body could not be donated for obvious reasons. If the person's BMI is too much, they won't accept the body. If they die of an illness, certain illnesses, I mentioned COVID, but other illnesses, the body won't be accepted.
Hep C or something.
Yeah. Let's see. It's just really important ahead of time.
Yes. So I just looked it up. Yeah. Donating usually doesn't require any cost. That's, I guess, part of the benefit of donating.
Yeah. Yeah, so if a person decides they want to donate their body, it's important that they contact the institution. The institution will send you a consent form that you need to fill out, and typically they'll have it witnessed by someone to assure that it's a valid consent form. And that's about it, really. You just need to decide what institution you want, and by Googling or using AI, you can find several institutions that are willing to take your remains and utilize them for the good of science or for medicine. I know you want to donate your brain, Gene, because everyone wants that.
There you go. I'm thinking maybe at some point we can pass a law, maybe on the open market, I can actually go to sell it to the highest bidder.
That's right.
We have to change the laws, though, in order for that to happen.
Yeah, well, we can. I can take care of that. I'll take care of that for you. And there's someone that asked about how do you know what funeral home to select? And here's what I have to say. Funeral directors are typically very good, honest people, but not all of them are. It's like physicians. Most physicians are great individuals, honest, but not all of them. And so it's important to read the reviews of the funeral home, maybe talk to family members who have utilized their services. I had the misfortune of knowing a funeral director who was completely unscrupulous, and found out that in her spare time she was using her position to take photographs, lewd photographs, and put them out on the internet. She was living two lives: a funeral director, and then she was a stripper. And whatever, that's fine. I don't judge anyone, but
that's not a common thing.
Not exactly. And she compromised the integrity of the funeral home and the bodies for
Scandalous
reasons. And it was very scandalous. And the most amazing part is she's still working. I won't say the name of the funeral home, but anyone could contact me and I'll be happy to let them know.
There you go, on the sly.
Right.
Oh, yeah, one thing somebody asked is, should a man and wife be buried together? I guess there's different ways of doing that.
See, I'm glad that we have that question because, and I happen to be in that situation. When my wife passed away, I had a double headstone made for Melinda and Randy, and I had all the information engraved. And so I put it on a plot where Melinda would be on one side, I'd be on the other side, and we'd share the one headstone. Then I moved to Spokane, Washington, and so fortunate to find someone I love, and I'm now sharing the second half of my life with them. So what do I do? Where I feel obligated to go be buried next to Melinda because that's where my headstone is, but I don't want to leave Amanda with no, physical remembrances of me. So I've come to the conclusion that I'm going to be cremated, and half of the ashes will go to Amanda, and half of the ashes will go to my family in Arizona, who will bury them at that gravesite with Melinda. So when the resurrection comes, the top half of me is going to be in one state, the bottom half is going to be in the other, and I'll just have to wander around until I find the right legs, get on them, and then I'm fine. But yeah,
that's right. If you were Brigham Young, you might have to have like half-ounce packets sent to each of the different wives to remember your body.
Right. And they do have little urns. Like I said, you can get little urns and it goes to each of your kids or each of your wives. But that is a serious quandary. My friend out of state was asking me about that and said that his wife wants to be disposed of one way and he wants another way. He doesn't want to be cremated, and she does. So where do they get buried in the same place? And, my answer to that is, like I'm going to do, probably bury your ashes next to your loved one. And you have to make that arrangement with a cemetery. Here's the thing. I know a lot about death, and I also know a lot about experiences with spirits. And, I'm writing a book about that now. They don't care where they're buried. They don't care who's buried where, because you don't have to go to the cemetery to reunite. These are just markers. So the family, if they want to go have a peaceful sit down or picnic at the grave to remember you, that's fine. But the spirit doesn't hang out there. The spirit's somewhere else. Whatever happens after death, I know that they don't just hang at the cemetery. So it doesn't matter.
Go to Disneyland. I think I'm going to go to Disneyland and ride the rides that I was afraid of when I was younger.
Yeah, because if you fall out, you just float down. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Good idea, Gene. Maybe Disneyland should make a ride just for spirits.
And then I could ride with people in the haunted mansion. And if they feel something,
whisper in their ear.
Whisper in their ear when the lights flicker.
Oh my gosh. Good point.
So did we cover how to know if the funeral home is honest and reputable? Is there like a better business?
It's just talking to family and friends and reviews. And also, you need to make sure that they offer the services that you're.
And one thing that happens, and we'll talk about that, most of our audience is LDS or former LDS. And there's a lot of times people go to funerals that are where kind of the bishop takes over and it becomes like almost a proselytizing moment for them, to like a commercial for, the plan of salvation or something else. And most of the friends and family that don't know the teachings don't even know what they're talking about. And some people feel uncomfortable. And we wanted to let people know that you could advocate. If that's what you want, that's what you should say. If you don't want that, you should advocate for yourself and your family and try to make it as friendly to the family as possible. Especially like celebration of life is important right now more. And I think you had some points about there are certain rules, but they're not written in stone anywhere. Some people record other things. Tell us more about that.
Well, first of all, I agree with you. With the LDS funerals, I'm going to be honest with you. Most of the people that have LDS funerals, at least in our funeral home where they had them, it was a yawn fest, because it's just kind of like a glorified sacrament meeting. There's not a whole lot of discussion about the individual person. It's more about, what does the gospel think about death, and what does the gospel teach that happens after death? And it's like listening to talks. And if that's what people want, then all the power to them. I want a freaking party when I die. I do not want tears. I don't want sadness. I don't want any church talks.
The Irish wake style.
Yeah, seriously. I want food, fun, music, and I'm not going to have, hey, let's be real. It's a lot cheaper to have an LDS funeral in a church.
You only want the people who you owe money to cry at your funeral, not everybody else.
Well, there will be a lot of weeping people at my funeral if that's the case. But I mean, let's be real. A funeral in a Mormon church is a lot cheaper because you don't pay for that. And I know the bishop has a handbook and has to go by certain standards of a funeral. But see, I had my mom's funeral and my dad's funeral both in the funeral home. And we we made our own rules and we gave our own talks. We didn't need to have a talk about eternal salvation. What we needed and what people needed at a funeral is to talk about the people that passed away, bringing fond memories, and a lot of times emotional memories. But talk about the person, because that's what a funeral is all about. Yeah. So I'm not a big fan of the way that the LDS Church conducts funerals, even though I've gone to like a gazillion of them.
Yeah.
Mine's going to be a party, absolutely.
And I noticed that somebody had talked about like things to put in the casket. Are there any taboos? Is it? I guess if it's a closed casket ceremony, you want to put it in before it gets closed. You want to arrange for that ahead of time.
Well, okay, let me tell you another little bending the rules a bit. There's things that you can put in the casket: pictures, memories, letters. I've seen people put the person's favorite neckties. I've seen them put their favorite stuffed animals, blankets. Oh gosh, alcohol, beer, a deck of cards. I'm just thinking right offhand of the funerals that I've attended too, and all the things that they put in the casket. There are some people who want to be buried with things that are a little too big to be placed in there. So when you get to the cemetery, you can always ask the funeral director, hey, I need you to open the casket for just a minute. And they'll usually oblige and open the casket, and you can place that big item in there and then close the casket again. And it may cover up the part of the body, but who cares? And if there's something that you've forgotten, we have opened the casket for people right there at the cemetery and let them put things in. There are some people who want to take things out of the casket, which is a big no-no if you're stealing something. But I have one of our viewers, actually. Her husband saw the insignia on the inside of the casket, and he really wanted it. Thought it was cool looking, and he debated, and asked his wife, "What do you think? Think I can take that?" And they were afraid it would rip the interior of the casket and all that, and so he didn't take it. The fact of the matter is, it was just magnetic. They put a lot of magnetic insignias in there that it may be military, it may be public service, stuff like that. And these magnetic insignias go in there. So he could have taken that. They were the next of kin. They can take things. It just gets a little iffy if you're not next of kin and you're taking diamond rings off of the person. Yeah, that's a big no-no. If they want to be buried with that stuff.
I think sometimes the deceased if it's a man, has like a boutonniere, and maybe somebody could take that off to remember him by.
Yeah, or they can take some of the flowers out. And my opinion is, even if taking that insignia off and it damaged the interior of the casket, who cares? Seriously, who cares? Casket's going to be damaged in a few years anyway, really damaged. And that's something I'll point out, and I think I already did. No matter how you're buried, nature's going to take its course. So don't spend too much time worrying about that, preserving the body.
And somebody asked what to do emotionally about the loss of a loved one. And so we could say they could buy your book, but we also could give them some free advice too.
I mean, my book, Filling Empty by Randy C. Watts on Amazon?
Right. That's right. 10% off with this code. No, I don't have a code.
I'll tell you what, that's such an important topic, Gene, and I'm glad you saved that for towards the end, because the absolute hardest thing to deal with has nothing to do with the final disposition of the loved one. It's got everything to do with healing. And that is incredibly tough. When I lost my Amanda, I really wanted to die. I wanted to go away, but I had kids and I didn't want to abandon them too. So it took everything I had just to stay here on the earth, and the grief feels like it's such a pain. It literally hurts in your stomach and your heart. You know what it's like, and I say this in Filling Empty. It's like someone reaching into your chest and tearing half of your heart off or away. And then that wound just doesn't heal up. You keep wanting it to heal. And just when it's starting to scab over, and just when it feels like maybe you're making progress, something happens. You see a particular TV show or restaurant, or you smell a fragrance, or you hear a song on the radio, and that wound rips wide open again.
It's like
So
PTSD.
it is. It literally is PTSD, and it's so difficult to overcome. You know, I always say that grief is the price we pay for love. And the more you love someone, the more you're going to grieve. And it doesn't matter what your beliefs are for the life hereafter. It really doesn't. When the time comes that you lose someone, you hurt now. You don't want to wait till the life hereafter to see them again. And especially for kids, you know, it's important the kids understand the importance of what death is, the importance of remembering their mom or their grandma or their aunt or their pet, remembering them with fond memories. No matter what anybody says, no matter what anybody preaches to them, it's not going to help the grief. What's going to help the grief is time. Time heals all wounds. And, you know, I tell people, like, and not to quote my own book, but the book has 3 points in it. Number one, you're not alone. There are people grieving all over this earth, hurting so bad they don't know what to do. Number two, there is life at the end of the tunnel, or light, I should say, at the end of the tunnel. They'll be happy again. They don't think they will, and they'll say, absolutely not, never. But they will. And there will come a time where they can smile when they think about their loved one rather than weep. But it takes time, and no one can tell anyone how to overcome the grief. That's a personal journey. Grief is it literally is a journey, and it may take way longer for some than for others. And the third point is,
now, may it also take mental health professional help?
yeah, you know, I went to therapy groups, grief groups. I tried a couple of them, and they didn't do anything for me because it was people saying that they lost their aunt or they lost their, you know, their great grandfather. And it's not that people don't grieve for that, they do. But I lost my spouse, and I wanted to talk to people who had lost their spouse. And I found a group through hospice that met every 2 weeks, and it was for people who had lost their spouse. And there was a big circle of us. There were like 28 of us. And I couldn't hardly wait for the next 2 weeks to come along because I had to be with someone who understood what I was going through. So they have individual grief counselors that'll help you, and therapists. And that may be an option for some. But for me, I wanted to be with the people who knew what I was going through. And I just wanted to say that the third point in feeling empty is your loved ones don't go as far as you think they do. You know, everyone has their own beliefs on what happens. Some believe that there's absolutely nothing after this life, and I respect that. But I believe that something still exists, that there's an energy, a love, a spirit that still exists, and we are able to call on that spirit when needed. And when we do a show just about grief, I'll tell you some of those experiences that really helped me through grief. But yeah, just be forewarned, my dear friends, that grief hurts. And if you haven't experienced it, you're going to find out. And sadly, you know, unless you die with all your loved ones in a big plane crash, you'll find out when you lose someone.
Well, thanks to everyone who contributed questions. You had posted on Facebook. We're going to do a show and have questions, and we try to summarize all the questions, boil them down into the ones that we talked about. And if there's any other questions that you want, you can leave them in the description. Leave them in the comments underneath this video. We'll try to come back and Randy will try to answer them, because I won't be able to answer anybody except with some sort of flippant comedic comeback. But anyhow, Randy will try to check those out, or visit Randy's Facebook page and
absolutely
ask him
Randy
some questions there. Yeah. And so thanks everybody for watching. I hope this helps. We all, like we say, are going to face it sometime. I lost my dad in 1999 and my mom in 2015. And
sorry,
growing up Mormon, in a way, I always felt that, well, I'm going to see him again and they're in a good place. And so I don't have to grieve. But so in a way, I don't know if it was just me or if that's a common experience with other people, that there was no real grieving that came about, that I am aware. One thing that I always, I catch myself, gee, I wish I could ask my dad a question about this, like, especially like Social Security or some other thing, since I'm in that age now, or ask my mom about family history or something. Right. And it was just nice to be able to ask, questions to our loved ones. And now at least we have Google and AI to help, or other family and friends we can talk to about things. But I think it is important to talk about the life of somebody who's passed. And I'm thinking that someday, before I pass, I want to do something different. I want to have a funeral where I'm not dead, but I get to go to my own sort of wake, just to say, hi and goodbye, even though I'm still going to be around for a little while.
Well, you plan ahead, and put it in writing, and it'll be so much easier for your family. And if you really want to take the burden off of them, get it all paid for ahead of time.
That's right. There you go. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching. Have a great rest of 2025, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Love.